Hey, welcome to the live stream. If you have any questions on writing or storytelling, feel free to drop them in the comments and I'll be happy to answer them. Or if you just want to hang out, that's also okay as well. How do you fix an action scene that seems to be boring or less exciting than you envisioned? One easy way to really make a fight scene more interesting is to really visualize the space of the fight scene. Because you hear all these other pieces of advice that are pretty common, like use short, choppy sentences and use sensory details to immerse the people in the fight, but don't get too detailed because it'll slow it down. That's all very true, but one I hear less often that I think actually does really make a fight scene a lot more fun is if you can visualize the space better for the fight scene. And I'm talking like, what are the obstacles in the room, the props, thing they can grab onto and fight with, and how can they move through the space to make the fight more dynamic? For example, if they're in a bar, they have bar stools, chairs, a bar top they can leap over, bottles, glasses, things they can use, things they can throw. You can throw a glass stein at someone's face or toss someone into a pile of chairs. You can grab a broken chair leg and use it as a weapon. And you can even like move the fight into the back as someone tries to escape. You can move through the space and make it a lot more dynamic and fun. So that is an easy way, I think, to really improve fight scenes is really visualize the space, really understand what props and what obstacles are at your disposal, and then use them to make the fight a lot more dynamic and fun. How should I deal with plot holes? I can't think of something that closes them and hopes no one notices. The reason you probably don't see a solution is because you're unwilling to unravel other parts of your story. Because the solution may not be, injecting this explanation here or adjusting this small thing. The solution to the plot hole might actually be, I have to rewrite a large portion of this novel. Or I have to sacrifice certain things that I wanted originally because it just does not work with the story. And that's a big undertaking. It can be challenging, and so we don't like to see that. So if you're struggling to find a solution for a plot hole, the answer might really be you're going to have to do a lot of work to fill the plot hole, and you have to change quite a bit in the story. So you can either do that, or you could try and shore it up and hope no one notices if you want to. But it's going to be there though, and some people will notice. Any main tips? Any tips for beginner writers? The main tips I like to give to beginner writers are the simplest piece of writing advice that is 100% true is you will improve fastest by reading and writing. You read books because you need to see how it's done. You need to get a natural felt sense, an instinct, if you will, for what feels right in a story, and you gain that by reading. You can watch movies, you can play video games, do all these other types of storytelling media, and they'll help you a little bit, but they won't help you develop that felt sense, that instinct of how a story is supposed to feel in fiction, in the written word. And that's the only way you're going to develop that is by reading. So I encourage you to read stories you love. I encourage you to practice writing, obviously, but I also encourage you to emulate writers. Don't be obsessed with originality, because you don't become original just from within yourself. Like you don't just originality doesn't come from you digging deep into somewhere inside you that's purely unique and no one else has done before and you bring it out. That's not what originality is. Originality is when you get influences from all these different writers that you've emulated over the years, and you've accrued aspects of their writing styles, and you've added your own values to your writing style, and you slowly start to accrue your own unique combination of influences. And that's where originality comes from. So when you're just starting out, don't obsess over originality. If you love a writer, go copy the writer's style. Try it on. Wear the hat. And what will happen is you'll write some stories that are very much in their vein, but then you'll find another writer you like, and you should definitely go and try and write the way they do. Accept the inspirations, accept the influences, because they will gradually, slowly but surely enrich your writing, and you'll keep taking pieces from each of them once again and create something new. And so that's what I recommend. One, read. Make sure you're reading as best you can, because that's going to help you a lot. And then when you're writing, don't be afraid to emulate writers. Don't ever just stick with one writer forever, because then you will just be copying them. But try on these different hats. I myself went through a lot of different phases over the years of writers I tried to emulate, whether it's J.K. Rowling when I was younger, Christopher Paolini, then Orson Scott Card, Ted Dekker, Stephen King, more recently, Hemingway was definitely a snobby influence of mine earlier on, and stuff like that. And just be sure to just try these all on, because what will happen is you'll start to, that's how you discover no, I don't want to use the word discover, because you're not discovering your originality, you're creating your originality slowly but surely by gaining all these influences. What's the biggest mistake you think new writers make? Asking as a new writer. The biggest mistake is they overfocus on little surface level errors in their writing. They think, oh, this phrasing doesn't feel quite right, or oh, this word's not quite right, or I misspelled these words, or this or that. And they're focusing too much on polish details that should be saved for your final draft, instead of focusing on the characters, the movements, just getting something down to work with. So that's a mistake a lot of new writers make, is they put too much effort into the first draft because they don't want to revise. They want to just set it and forget it. But as a writer, to write effectively, you need to understand that a lot of your work is going to come through revision. And so that will make it easier to write the first draft, and it'll make your story better. Because the problem is, if you focus on polishing everything in that first draft, you are going to waste a lot of time if you have to change something significant, because you might have to. Likewise, if you put a lot of time and effort into polishing that first draft, you'll become more resistant to making bigger changes later on, because you've already invested so much time. And so it's very counterproductive to be hyper focused on polishing and writing just the perfect little lines in that first draft. Embrace the messiness. Understand that writing messily, especially in a first draft, does not make you a bad writer. In fact, it makes you a strategic writer, makes you a smart writer. And so that's what I encourage you as a new writer to keep in mind, is to embrace the messiness of your first drafts. And then also embrace the gift that is the revision process, the ability to take what was messy and then really shape it into something amazing. And I would also recommend, go online, Google shitty first drafts. Shitty first drafts. It's by Anne Lamott. And it is a chapter from her book, Bird by Bird. And it is a wonderful explanation of why we all write and should write shitty first drafts. It's great. I highly recommend it. How do you write a 3-person love triangle? I would say there's a few different ways you can tackle a love triangle. First off, I think you need to make, for a love triangle to be convincing, I think you need to make it so that there's actual plausibility that the main character could go with either one of the two suitors. And so there's a couple ways I think you can go about doing that. The first one is, both of them could represent different parts of the main character and the needs of the main character. So then the main character has to weigh whether or not, like, which aspect they value more. And so that can really help make it seem like a balanced decision. The other thing you could do is make one clearly better for the character, but maybe the main character doesn't think they deserve the good thing. So, for example, I recently read the Mistborn trilogy, and there's a bit of a kind of love triangle in the second one, where Vin, the main character, has to choose between Elend, who's like the clearly better for her love interest guy, or this guy named Zane, I believe might be his name. And Zane represents the dark side of Vin, the destructive side, and what she believes at the time anyway is what she deserves, even though it's not what will make her happy. And so she's torn between that destructive decision and the much healthier, better decision of being with Elend. And so it's not that they are both equally worth her love, or not. It's not that they're both equally worthy of her love. It's that the character is trying to make a decision about their own future and their own insecurities, and so it becomes plausible that she could go either way with it, and that makes the tension real. So those are a couple different ways you can do it. It also helps if you tie it to the characters, once again, their growth journey. The Vin one definitely does. Or if you did it the way I originally said, where it was like both of them represent two different sides of the main character in terms of their emotional needs. The character could very much have kind of a need-want relationship there. They want this, but they need this. So that can make those a lot more compelling for sure. How do you add tension to your book? One easy way to create tension in your story is if the story demands your character do one thing, but they want something else, that creates tension. And that's really good. So like, for example, in the Alex Rider series, YA series, Alex is a teen spy, and Alex Rider is forced by his government, or guilted into by his government, to go on these teen spy missions. And if he wanted that, there wouldn't be much tension and just be kind of like, yeah, he's a super spy, whatever. But he doesn't want to do these things. He feels guilted into it and feels like he has to at times, but he wants to live a normal life. And so that creates tension between what the character wants and what the plot demands of him. And that makes it interesting. That's one way you can create tension. Other ways you can create tension is like pitting the motivations and desires of characters against each other. So if two people are discussing their relationship, let's say one of them just got a job elsewhere and they need to have a conversation about whether they're going to get married and go together over there or if they're going to break up. Let's say one of them wants to have the conversation, but the other one keeps putting it off. Every conversation between them is going to have tension because one of them is trying to start the conversation and the other one is refusing to have that conversation. And that creates tension. So tension often comes when there's a disparity between what must happen and what the characters want, or when two characters' desires are pitted against each other. So those are some ways you can create tension in your story. I'm struggling with show, don't tell. Do you have any tips to help me improve on this? Thank you. Yeah, so with show, don't tell, I think the easiest way to get better at it is to start, even in your own mind, by telling and then asking yourself, well, how can I demonstrate this? So for example, if you're trying to say a character is angry, telling it would be to say, Billy is angry, or Billy was angry. So then you've done that. That's the telling. Now ask yourself, well, what is Billy doing because he's angry? Is he slamming his hand on the table? Is he throwing his cup across the room? Is he irritable? Is he snapping at people when they talk to him? Or is he getting red in the face? Like, there's so many things that he could be doing to demonstrate why he's angry. So you say Billy was mad, but instead of doing that, take away the Billy was mad and say Billy was shaking in his seat, or Billy threw the cup across the room, or whatever it might be, or Billy slammed the table before he spoke. Like, we're starting to get to then that he's angry. We understand he's angry, and you can remove the telling. Another one, let's say Katrina was sad. What is Katrina doing because she's sad? Is she crying? That's one easy way to show sadness. Is she off on her own, sitting and not talking to people, being reclusive in a way she normally isn't? Is she acting differently from how she normally does? Does somebody say something and you can just tell it breaks her on the inside? Like, you can just see her face fall and it touches on a wound that's still raw. Like, these are things that come through that are actually, these are the things that are the expression of the telling. It's the expression of the emotion. And so you want to focus more on those expressions of the emotion rather than just saying he was mad or she was sad. So that's what I recommend you do, is when you're trying to show instead of tell, feel free to tell right there on the page, even if you want to, for that first draft or whatever you're doing. But then look at that and say, okay, he's mad, she's sad, they're in love. And then ask yourself, what are they doing that demonstrates that? And then focus on those details as you're drafting. How do you know if a story is good? Well, first thing I would say is, don't believe the lie that there is an idea of a story objectively being good, because the standards we create for stories are completely arbitrary. They don't objectively exist. It's just what we as a society have decided to value. And depending on the era you look at, what made a good story back in the 1800s is not what makes a good story nowadays. We have very different aesthetics. And that doesn't mean classics don't have value anymore, or that classics can't still be considered good by modern standards. It's just the time, the aesthetics and the values of the time influence how we define something as good or not. So with that aside, accepting first of all that there is no such thing as like an objectively good, well, really anything, because there is no objective good definition. That being said, obviously there's different levels of skill that go into stories, and you can look at a book and you'd be like, oh, this was executed really well, this was not executed really well, and all those things. And the ways you learn that is simply by reading, writing, and learning about writing and critiquing. For example, it's if you want to look at whether imagery is just descriptions, if you will, are executed well in a story. Look at how specific and unique the details are. If the description is very full of cliches, or they're very broad, like, oh, She was wearing a red dress and had brown hair in a ponytail. That description is, it's hard to say for sure if it's bad because it depends on what you're trying to like do in that particular scene, but it's not like a good description. Like the red dress doesn't really tell us too much. Yeah, there's connotations with the color red, but meh. And her brown hair in a ponytail is fine, but it's not doing a whole lot. So like, what'd be better is if you could tell us very unique details that tell us a lot about the character. For example, maybe she has homemade earrings on with like little spark plugs in her ear or something like that. She's created her own like really weird kind of quirky earring, and maybe her red dress was homemade, or maybe it's really brand new luxury fabric. She's rich, you know, you're kind of conveying more that way. And so those are like some different things you can do, look at for descriptions. And once again, like there's all these different ways you can see whether a particular aspect of a story is good or not. It's just a matter of learning them and then kind of weighing that holistically. And there's a lot of different ways to appreciate a story. So there's often going to be stories where like some things are done really well, but some things are done really poorly. Doesn't make it good or bad. It depends what you value as a writer. And that's where some of the subjectivity comes in. Once again, I said there's no objective definition of what's good or bad. Because that's the other thing too. Even if we can agree some things are done better than others, where's the cutoff of good is a very subjective decision. Because I think a lot of like really high-minded, like artsy fartsy people who condemn writers like a lot of people will say Stephen King's a shitty writer. I think if you say that, you're like your skewed perspective. Like, is he a Virginia Woolf? Is he a Hemingway? No, Stephen King is definitely not that. But just because he's not as good as like, you know, the literary elite or whatever doesn't mean he's not good in like at a lower level. Like you're cutting off what is good at a very high level, and that's an arbitrary distinction to make. And so that's why it's hard to say like what is good and what isn't, because the cutoff for what is good and what isn't is pretty arbitrary a lot of the time. All right, everybody, thank you all so much for hopping on the live stream today. I'm going to hop off now. I do this every week on Saturdays at 2 p.m. Central Time, and I hope to see you guys next week. Have a great week, everybody.